I'm next. My name's Rye.
Before you start, may I cook you up?
No one can hear me. Although I'm really loud, so I'm sure it still picked it up anyway. Nah, I'm good. So I was racking my brains. I wonder if I accidentally just turned it off. There's a lot of buttons here.
Try it in your shirt.
We're fine.
Okay, good. So I was racking my brains on what I was going to talk about, and I felt like, as far as I know, male-identifying person on this panel, I felt a certain amount of pressure about that. Primarily in the MeToo era, male-identifying people are in the hot seat for good reason. And there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. I mostly call it patriarchy. I thought it was rather amusing. Steve Bannon, that character, was in the news recently saying that the anti-patriarchy movement is going to be bigger than the Tea Party ever was. And the right is very afraid of this. And of course, that was demonizing what we're doing here. A lot of what we're doing here is undoing patriarchal notions. Things like ownership and conquering and, old ideas of your wife is your property and things like that. And I keep coming back to the ideas of dignity and honor, that everyone deserves dignity, and that when they have their dignity somehow taken from them is when they're most hurt in a Me Too sense. And that everyone should be striving to be honorable. But what do those mean? You can't really put it into a single image. Like, you can't post a picture of your dignity on Facebook. Like, that's not really going to convey. How would a man show that they have honor on social media? It's really difficult, right? And so I come back to two basic ideas here, which is what to do and what do you do when you screw it up. Right? So what to do? We've got different models of consent to consider. You can Google these. I'm going to go through one of them in detail, but I'm going to list a few before I get started. So I come from a lot of different realms, whether it be from the BDSM world or from my days when I was considering the priesthood years ago. A lot of different ideologies that have been in my head over the years, and I've kind of ranged on being pretty conservative to rather intersectional leftist today. So I'm going to list a couple of these. We've got SSC, right? Safe, sane, and consensual. That's an older model that's kind of fading out, so we're not going to bother with it too much today. We've also got RAC, which would be risk-aware consensual kink, where the important part is that you're aware of the risks you're taking and you're consenting to whatever the thing is that you're doing, right? But what I'm really going to focus on today is called fries. And you can pull up in Google image search Planned Parenthood fries, like the French fries, We've got...
Someone's hungry.
Right? Maybe you can't read that. Doesn't matter. You've got F-R-I-E-S. F for... No. For freely given. Freely given. So if it's coerced or pressured, it's not really freely given. Right? And you can't take it. It's got to be given. Right? R. This one gets a lot of heat in the Me Too era. Reversible. R is for reversible. What does reversible mean? Does it mean that you can change it retroactively? Sometimes. Sometimes it does mean that. But primarily what it's talking about is that, let's say, for example, a hug. Someone says, "May I give you a hug?" And you say yes, and the hug begins. And then it never ends. Like, it's just going on and on and on. But at any moment, either one of you has the right to end the hug. Yes, you said yes to the hug. But now you can reverse your yes to a no. The hug is over now. I had someone hold on to me for a 20-second hug that I wasn't expecting and whisper, "Consent is sexy," in my ear. As I didn't sign up for this. I is for informed. You have to understand what it is that you're consenting to. And that goes under risk-aware in a crucial way. You've got to have the information to know what you're saying yes to. Like for the hug, for example, I didn't understand that I was signing up for 20 seconds. I thought it was going to be like a typical 2-second hug from a total stranger. But the moment they let me go, I'm sitting there in the last couple seconds of this going, when is this going to end? They said that, see, it only takes about 20 seconds to release oxytocin, which is how we bond with each other. And immediately I thought to myself, well, news to me, I was not informed of this. And two, I didn't consent to bonding with you in this way. E is for enthusiastic. We hear about this one a lot, enthusiastic consent. We want a hell yes, not just a I guess yes. Right? Enthusiastic is what gets a lot of emphasis in this era, but I feel like some of these other ones are just as important. You know, I enthusiastically agreed to that hug, but I was not very informed about what it really involved, and I didn't feel particularly safe reversing it. It felt weird to push this person away. I wanted to be nice, I wanted to respect their feelings, I wanted to respect their intent, but the impact they were having on me lasted to the point where I'm still talking about it, and it was months ago. An S for specific. Specific, you know, if she had been very specific that, would you like to have a 20-second oxytocin bonding hug with me? I would have said no. I would have said no if it had been that specific, but it wasn't. It was the vague hug, which then I assumed meant what I typically think of a hug. Now, we might all have a different perception of what a hug means and how long the hug is, or how creepy the hug is. You know, I joke about creepy hugs. I'm like, how could a hug be creepy? I was like, let me show you. Let me show you. You know, there could be a slight thrusting forward. There could be one of those kind of rubbing hugs. You know, there's a lot of ways that a hug could be crossing some boundaries. So to go over this, we got freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. And Planned Parenthood has been passing around a little picture of fries with this all spelled out. And there's a lot of articles and think pieces on all the details of it. I just feel like it's so comprehensive. Yes?
I also think that specific, doesn't it also mean that we might be having a specific hug right now, but 10 minutes from now, that's a different time, a different place. The experience is very specific. Having another one 10 minutes a day from now the first hug does not entitle you to all the other hugs. It's a very specific experience.
That's true. Yeah, it's also, I do believe in time as it relates to consent in the way that you can grant future permission. And I really love the castle metaphor. There was the tea metaphor for consent that went around a few years ago. It went very viral. How many are familiar with this tea metaphor for consent? I didn't like it at all. I felt it had a lot of issues. And one of the issues, you know, it compared it to things like, well, if you're passed out, you don't try to pour the tea down the throat. Valid. But when I'm really drunk, give me some tea. Right? Like, I might actually not want the tea, and yet I need it for various reasons. Oh, you know, I might be refusing the water, but in that case, you're really having my best interest in mind. So please, get me to drink the water while I'm too inebriated. So it had issues when it came to inebriation and some other stuff. I like the castle metaphor better, and there's a similar little cartoon drawing of it in the same way that the tea had. So if you Google castle metaphor for consent, should pop right up. And it's this idea that with any individual, not just random strangers, but anybody, you start to slowly build a castle of consent together. And this is certain assumptions you make about each other. For example, if you've been with a romantic partner for X number of years, there's certain ways that you interact with each other where you assume that it's okay until told otherwise. Now sometimes a little paint chips off the walls and you have to repaint them. You have to have this conversation again. You told earlier the story of the married couple who had never really talked about it. They were building a consent castle together for 30 years, largely unspoken, but a lot of other nonverbal dialogue going on. and certain habits, but maybe there's some things that need to be greased, some paint that needs to be redone. So I look into that metaphor. But I'd like to change topics now to what you do when you screw it up. So we're talking about how to get it right or how to be more careful. But I'd like to talk about what's called the nopology. In order to really understand an apology, it helps to understand a nopology or a faux apology. These are non-apologies.
That's good.
The faux apology, the nopology. All right. What constitutes an apology? Can we shout out some things here for a moment? What's part of an apology?
Taking responsibility.
Responsibility is a good one. Anything?
Sincerity.
Sincerity.
Indicating how it has harmed the other person.
Acknowledging harm.
Sincere
Remorse.
description of the wrongful behavior.
Listening. These are all definitely big parts of apologies. We're going to get back to that. First, we're going to talk about nopologies in some detail here. We're going to do some examples, and then we're going to get into some more structured, where these examples fall into. I'm sorry you feel that way. Nopology. Right? Everyone's heard that one before. Yeah. Mistakes were made.
That's a corporate apology.
Title of a good book, which is Mistakes Were Made, but not by me.
If anyone was offended, then. If, then, right? Reminder, these are things to not do. these are no apologies, right? There was a classic incident in Malaysia where it was a diplomat in Malaysia in 2014, and the quote in the press was, "We'd like to acknowledge responsibility where that acknowledgement is appropriate." So these are all no apologies, right? In '97, Deborah Levy wrote a paper called "The Role of Apology in Mediation," and that's in the New York Law Review. And she put it into 4 categories specifically: tactical apology, explanatory apology, formalistic, and I swear to God I didn't make this up, happy ending apology. Now, either happy ending didn't have that connotation in '97, or Deborah Levy has a good sense of humor. Okay, so tactical apology. This is something where the point of the apology is strategy. Slytherin, maybe. The point of it is PR spin. It's to make yourself look good. It's to show how great you are, how much you know, how wise you are, to achieve a certain end. It's a very selfish move. I call it PR spin. You've got the explanatory apology. This is what I'm most guilty of doing in my personal life. Someone tells me that I've hurt them. Immediately I want to explain what I was thinking, what I was doing, how I was feeling, why I would do such a thing. I want to explain. It's a defensive approach. There's a big flaw in that it's not listening very well. And it's not acknowledging that it's still my fault regardless of the excuses.
And then you're asking the offended person to take care of your feelings.
That is a big part of it. Emotional labor is a big part of that, and trying to settle me down. Now I'm upset that I've upset someone. Formalistic is kind of like when you smack your little brother and then your parents go, "Now go apologize to your little brother." And then you go over there and go, "I'm sorry. Mom said I need to apologize, so I'm sorry." That's formalistic. And you'll see that sometimes in business and politics. And certainly in the MeToo era, where when someone's career is threatened by their misbehavior, then they know that there is this pressure from society and from their higher-ups that I better issue a PR apology to the public. And that's often what we're seeing in the Me Too era is this PR move, where it's a mixture of explanatory, tactical, and formalistic. Right? That's often what we're seeing. And we don't really know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know about the private letter or the private conversation that's happened with any of these people. Sometimes there hasn't been one, and so they feel their only resort is a PR move to the public. And then we have the happy ending apology, an actual apology. And it's difficult for everyone to agree what that looks like, what it sounds like, what it includes, and how extraneous extra information clouds the intent and the purpose and the effect of a good apology. I have yet to see any definition or any apology that everyone was universally, that was a great apology. On any of these issues that have come up on a celebrity level, where we can see relatively the evidence of what's happened, the emotion behind it, and the apology, there's groups of people going, oh, look at this apology, this is great. Meanwhile, other groups say this is terrible, look how manipulative it is. And typically it's because it's falling into one of those categories, the tactical, the explanatory, or the formalistic. So here is one definition of apology that takes all that and summarizes it. So an apology is an acknowledgement of injury that accepts responsibility with vulnerability. And that vulnerability can take different forms. It can be purely emotional, like remorse, regret, shame. It could include reparations, like covering the cost of damages. Sorry, I bumped into your car with my car. It's $300. Here's the cash. Right? It could include making yourself vulnerable to getting fired. If you're admitting the thing that you're being accused of, you may have consequences. So it's acknowledging injury, accepting responsibility with vulnerability.
Beautiful.
Right? How does that definition feel? Is that something that makes sense to people? Does that cover it? Am I leaving something crucial out?
Yes.
There's a lot of hands. Okay.
Facilitating empathy.
Vulnerability, I think, is part of that.
It's the vulnerability on behalf of the person sharing. And you're right, it's complete, it's beautiful, and it kind of leads to that place also of having the person who was affected really be seen and heard for, and I'm aware how it affected you. Just kind of giving it back to a few elements of empathy.
I think empathy is really important when possible. I don't think it's always possible. I think that there's times where I might not be able to relate on any level to the person who's been harmed. And I think that gets in the way of a lot of our apologies, where we try to, there's empathizing, there's relating, and there's understanding. Sometimes the best I can do is understand. And I'm talking about myself for the moment, but I think that it's expandable where, if you say you're injured, I have to just believe you. I have to just believe that you're not lying about your injury. When I bump into your car, I can see the scratch. But then we can also debate, well, it's not that big of a scratch. Whereas this is your prized possession, one-of-a-kind, collector's edition car, and it's a big, big deal if there's a scratch, right? So empathy, I think, can get in the way sometimes, where there's the expectation to have it, but I don't think it's always possible. And I think that's a pretty controversial opinion of mine. So I welcome disagreement with that one.
Like maybe you can, you don't have to wait for yourself to feel empathetic.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't wait for it because it might not come.
I come back to hugs. There was a time, and I brought this up before, where I was in line at an event for the bathroom, and there were 5 men ahead of me to get into the bathroom, and a topless woman came up, and she gave each one of them a big hug. And then I gave her a big hug. And she stopped me in my tracks. And she's like, you didn't have permission to give me a hug. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought it was okay. I thought it was just going down the road. She's like, no, those are my friends. I know all those guys. I don't know you. Oh, got it. And I didn't wait to have any empathy. I was already apologizing. Those were the first words out of my mouth was, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. But then I needed to hear it from her more details before I could empathize. So it did take listening to have empathy. But even if, I had weird feelings about that moment for a long time. This was a handful of years ago. But I had to process all that. I was like, wait a minute. A hug is that big of a deal? It was difficult for me at first. It took some time.
So I guess listening is implied, that listening has happened and therefore then the definition of your apology is a result of that? I mean,
yeah. You have to listen first. You have to know what you've done.
Right.
And I use listening. I don't like that listening is limited to the audio territory of things. It can be visual. You can see that someone's crying. You can see that someone is injured. So it's like somehow receiving the input and paying attention.
I think one of the things that number one, apologies are important. But it's hard to set a universal rule for it.
It's really hard.
The value of an apology is going to depend on the context. It's going to depend on what was done and what the other person needs, or people need in the circumstances. So you might, your first position might be a sort of sincere statement of regret. Damn, wish I hadn't done that. Hadn't written, whatever, something of that kind. And then you're going to want to find out what the other person needs in return. You might not necessarily agree what they want in return. You might have a principled reason for not giving them everything they want, because the whole thing is going to depend on an examination of what happened and what principles were violated or not, which brings up another point, actually, which is the no apology. When you say to somebody, I'm sorry you feel that way, that's a thing you say when you recognize that the other person is upset in some way, but you don't think that they have a principled reason for feeling upset. There's got to be the space to be able to say, I don't actually think you have a legitimate grievance here, but I'm sorry you feel that way. I mean, there has to be room for that in some circumstances.
It's an incomplete apology. And what I was trying to define there was a complete apology. But it's beyond the scope and the time that we have today to get into all this. And one more, and then we should move on.
The one last thing that I heard described as part of an apology that we haven't touched on is committing to a new course of action in the future.
I don't think that's part of an apology, personally. I think that's about amends and reparation, but it's bigger than a single apology. I think that accountability is incredibly important, and there's different models right now of what that looks like. And we get into even religious views of it and how that's affected our perceptions of apology. Is it you said I'm sorry and thus instantly get forgiveness? Can you have forgiveness and then be held accountable for years to come? The whole idea of forgiving and forgetting, forgive but don't forget, accountability is way bigger than what I include in apology. But a lot of people do, so I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you much.